Alright, so our second part of the objective is to learn about ecological succession. And our essential question is, what occurs during ecological succession, and how does it relate to short and long-term changes in an ecosystem? So yesterday we talked about short-term and long-term changes. Now we're going to look at, alright, so if those changes occur to a system and destroy, be it very little or a lot of organisms, how is it going to come back? And it comes back through what we call ecological succession. So basically what ecological succession is, it is basically a natural process in which a community of organisms replace the existing ones. Succession basically means to replace. If you succeed someone else, you replace them. Your successor is the person that replaces you. Okay? So what we're looking at is we're looking at, in the environment, what organisms replace what other organisms. And it's a natural process. It's a natural process in which basically you are looking at, after time, certain organisms are going to replace others. And you've seen that before. I'm sure you've seen areas that basically are just dirt, and then you start seeing some grasses. And then after you start seeing some grasses, you start seeing weeds that are a little taller. And then shrubs, and then so on and so on. And the reason for it is because the first organisms that are there prepare the area for later organisms. So that's what's actually happening. Now there are two types of ecological succession. The first one is primary ecological succession. What does the word primary mean? First. Okay? So primary succession occurs when there is nothing in the area but rock. There's nothing there but rock. There's no soil, there's no plants, it's just rock. Now think about it. Can grass grow on rocks?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, there's nothing there.
Okay, it's just rock. What is grass? What do you need to grow plants in? Soil. So if all you have is rock, do you have soil? No. Can the plants grow? No. So, no, but there's no cracks yet.
Okay.
It's just rock. Now, where do we get soil from? Rocks. What has to happen to the rocks in order for us to get soil?
Break down.
Weathering, breaking down, weathering and erosion. So, before we can start growing anything, we have to make these rocks into soil. And what happens is you have something called a pioneer species. Lichens and mosses, yes. So you get a pioneer species. What did the pioneers do whenever they came over?
First made farmland.
They basically made farmland. They're the first ones here, right? Pioneers were the first ones in an area. That's what pioneer means. Pioneer basically means the first ones to inhabit an area. So, when we have primary ecological succession, we have something called pioneer species. Those pioneer species are the species that can come in first. And those species are, for the most part, lichens and mosses. So lichens and mosses are able to grow on rock. So they don't need soil, they can grow on the rock. Whenever they start growing on this rock, their roots start breaking away at the rock. Chemicals that they have start breaking away at the rock, so they start weathering the rock. And then those pieces fall off. Now, that new soil isn't good enough for grass to grow yet. This happens over a long period of time. Those lichens have to break a lot of rock. Plus, some of those lichens and some of those mosses have to die. When they die, and they go into the rock and the soil, the new soil, they put nutrients in the soil. Because grass can't just grow in soil that doesn't have any nutrients. It needs to have nitrogen, it needs to have certain things in there in order for plants to grow. So, from here to here takes a long time. It takes a long time because a rock isn't going to be that easy to break by some lichens and mosses. It's going to take a long time. Plus, these lichens and mosses have to die and come back, die and come back, die and come back in order to put the nutrients into the soil. Once you have soil and you have nutrients in them because of the dying and living of these organisms, then you have soil, then grass can grow. So this process right here takes a long time because it's not so easy to break that rock down and put in the nutrients. Because if you don't put in the nutrients, the soil from the rock isn't going to get anything. Okay, you're not going to grow anything. Okay, so once you have soil, you have your grass. Okay, so now these grasses are once again dying and living, putting more nutrients in there. The more nutrients there are, then you can have some shrubs. You can have some other bigger plants. Same thing, these shrubs die, survive, die, survive, die. More and more nutrients are being put in. Then you get your trees, your hardwoods. You get your big forests. So an ecological succession basically is just a step from going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And as this is happening, you're also getting some animals. Here, you're probably going to get maybe some insects, some bacteria, things like that, right? Here, you might get some bigger insects. You still have the same bacteria. You might get some rabbits because they eat off of grass, things like that. So a little bit bigger animals. Then you have shrubs. You're probably going to get some deer, some wolves, some foxes, some bigger animals. And then trees, you start getting birds because that's where they nest, things like that. So you are also, apart from looking at ecological succession as looking at plants, you also need to think about, you're also changing the community, the animals that are living in that area, or the other organisms that are living in that area. Okay? So, any questions over this type? So that's primary succession. This one takes a long time because this process right here takes a long time. Okay? Then you have something called secondary ecological succession. In secondary ecological succession, what occurs is that there's a change that disturbs the communities and the organisms that are there and kills most of the plant life. If it kills most of the plant life, it also kills most of the animals. Or the animals move away. Okay? So in secondary ecological succession, in that one occurs whenever most of the plants are destroyed. When most of the plants are destroyed, the animals are going to move away. Yes, question?
Should we like say that big disasters?
Yes, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. So, since here, the only thing that died was plants, now you have a bunch of dead plants on the ground, right? What's going to come in and break those dead plants down? Decomposers. Decomposers come in, they break them down, all those nutrients go into the soil, because the soil is still there. It didn't go away, it's still there. But now you put a bunch of nutrients into the soil, right? Once those nutrients are there, what can grow very quickly? Grass, and then shrubs, and then trees. So technically, secondary succession looks exactly the same as the second part of primary succession. The only difference between primary and secondary is that primary, you're starting off with rock, and secondary, you're starting off with soil. Yes. So this one occurs a lot quicker. And I'm pretty sure you've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it where, in some areas they've cleared everything out and all you see is dirt. And a few weeks later, grass is already starting to grow in there. Now, it's not completely full of grass, but some grasses are growing in there. And the reason for it is because since the soil is there, there's nutrients there, the soil can grow. So, this succession occurs until the community is stable. Then the community is stable, no new plants are going to grow. Okay? No new plants will colonize, meaning no new plants are going to come in. And we call that community the climax community. And it's going to be different in different places. In areas that are considered grasslands, the climax community is grasses. You don't have a lot of trees because things occur to basically kill them. Be it the climate isn't good for trees, or, for example, there's a lot of tornadoes that come in and tear them out, or there's grass fires. So, in certain areas, the climax community might be grass. Grasslands, the climax community is grass. If you go to the rainforest, the climax community is those types of trees that are there. If you go to the redwood forest, the climax community are the redwoods. If you go to a maple forest, the climax community is the maples. So the climax community is just the last community that's go in there, and it doesn't allow anything else to grow in, anything else new to grow. So, if we take this and relate it to what we learned yesterday, long-term and short-term changes, which of these occurs after a short-term change? Secondary. After a hurricane or a drought that kills most of the plants, you're still left with soil, right? So secondary ecological succession, for the most part, will follow a short-term change. Okay? Make sure you have that in your notes, because you need to make sure that you make that connection. So, secondary ecological succession usually occurs after a short-term change. Now, what would happen after a long-term change? Primary. A lot of times. Not always. But let's say I have a humongous volcanic eruption. Everything is dead because basically lava killed it. And what does that lava do when it cools down? Hardens into? Isn't that the first part of the primary?
Yes.
Yes. So when all you have is rock, you're going to have primary ecological succession. When you start off with soil, you're going to have secondary. For the most part, that comes after a long-term change. This comes after a short-term change. Any questions over that? Oh. Okay. All right. Now, we're going to move on. And we are going